My mother tried to steal my eggs after I said I didn't want to be a mom. There is this one image that still makes my stomach twist every single time someone says the word family. I am sitting on a plastic chair in a locked room that smells like cleaning products and overcooked vegetables, wearing paper clothes that crinkle every time I move, while my mother carefully hangs up a little mobile of plastic stars above my bed, like she is decorating a nursery. On the table, there is a stack of pregnancy magazines, a bottle of vitamins, and a folder with my name on it next to the word treatment. The door is locked from the outside. The window has bars. A nurse has just taken my shoes so I will not hurt myself. And my mother is smiling like everything is finally going according to plan. If you had walked in right then, you would probably have thought I was some poor woman who had a breakdown because she could not have a baby. That is exactly what my mother wanted everyone to think. She wanted them to see a tragic case, a woman consumed by grief, someone who needed to be protected from her own mind and guided gently toward motherhood. What nobody in that building knew was that the only thing I was trying to protect was my body, my future, and the tiny piece of freedom I had managed to carve out of the mess she raised me in. So, yeah, that is where I am going to start. Not at the beginning, not at my birth, not with some dramatic, "I never thought this would happen to me" line. I am starting in that locked room, in that ridiculous paper outfit, with my mother humming a lullaby she used to sing when she made me pretend I was pregnant at 8 years old. Because if you understand that scene, the rest of it will make sense in a way that is honestly more disturbing than any horror movie. Growing up, I thought it was normal that other kids' moms talked about school and hobbies and summer camps, while mine talked about wombs and calling and sacred purpose. We lived in this small community that loved to call itself family-oriented and faith-based, which sounds sweet until you realize it basically means everyone is obsessed with what happens inside your house and inside your body. My mother was like a celebrity there. People would stop her after meetings to ask for advice about raising daughters, about fertility, about staying open to life. She would tilt her head modestly, do that fake, humble smile, and say things like, "Oh, we just follow the plan. The girls know their calling." By the girls, she meant me and my younger sister. I am the older one by 3 years, which apparently meant I was the prototype, and my sister was the upgraded model. My mother liked to joke about that sometimes, like, "I tested everything on you first, and then I perfected it with your sister." She thought that was funny. I did not. When I was around 8, my mother brought home these weighted fabric belts that looked like something between a costume and medical equipment. She laid them on the dining table like they were sacred objects, then called us in with this dramatic announcement voice she used when she wanted to make something sound holy. "This," she said, patting the belt like it was a pet, "is how we are going to prepare your bodies for the blessing that is coming one day." I remember looking at my sister, who was still small enough that her feet dangled off the chair, and we both just kind of stared. My mother strapped one of the belts around my belly, tightening it until I made this little noise, and she laughed softly like I was being silly. "It has to feel real, Julie," she said. "You cannot complain when the real blessing comes. Better to train now." Yeah. My name is Julie, by the way. I probably should have said that earlier, but honestly, in that house my name did not matter as much as the word motherhood. That was the only identity my mother cared about. Daughter was just the training stage. She started making us wear those things for hours every day. At first they were light, just a few pounds, and she framed it as a game. We did chores with the fake belly. We walked around the living room while she played videos of breathing exercises on the television. We cradled plastic dolls and pretended to nurse them while she whispered corrections over our shoulders, telling us to be gentler, softer, more devoted. Whenever I complained that my back hurt or that the belt was rubbing my skin raw, she would add another pound and say, "Real mothers do not quit when it hurts. You do not want to be the kind of woman who fails her future children. Do you?" My sister, on the other hand, leaned into it like it was her whole personality. She would walk around the house caressing her fake belly and talking to her imaginary baby in this soft voice that made the adults around us melt. People would visit and gush over how sweet it was that she was practicing. My mother would beam like she had raised a saint. "That one," she would say, looking at my sister like she was made of gold, "was born to be a mother. I can feel it." Then she would glance at me, always a little sharper, and add, "We just have to work a bit more with Julie. She is more stubborn." Stubborn, in my mother's vocabulary, meant I had opinions. It meant I asked questions like, "Why do we never talk about any other kind of future?" Or, "Why do the boys get to play outside while we watch these birth videos again?" Or my personal favorite, "If this is such a blessing, why does everyone in those videos scream like they are dying?" She did not like that one. We did not go to regular school. My mother called it home education, but it was basically her making sure no teacher ever had the chance to notice anything weird. She had this script prepared for anyone who asked about the belts or the dolls or the breathing exercises. Oh, they are just playing maternity. It is educational. They love it. And honestly, my sister did look like she loved it. By the time she was 16, she was already talking about how her dream was to be a vessel for families who could not have children. I remember standing in our tiny kitchen, leaning against the counter with a mug of cheap hot chocolate, listening to her tell me with shining eyes that she wanted to carry babies for couples who would pay her. It is like a calling and a job at the same time, she said. Can you imagine, Julie? Making money and doing something holy? I stared at her and said, yeah, imagine that. But what I was imagining was her body folding under the weight of pregnancy after pregnancy, until there was nothing left of the girl who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms and hide under my blanket. Our community loved her. When she turned 18, my mother threw this huge party. Not for graduating or getting into college or anything like that. No. The big celebration was because my sister had signed her first contract with a fertility agency that worked with gestational carriers. That was the phrase my mother liked. Gestational carrier. She said surrogate sounded too cold. People brought gifts. There were speeches. My mother stood up in front of everyone and talked about sacrifice and service and how her daughter was offering her body as a living altar. I stood in the back holding a plastic cup of punch I did not want, feeling like I was watching a livestock auction dressed up as a religious event. By then, I had already started planning my escape. I was obsessed with the idea that there had to be another life out there, one where my worth was not measured by my womb. I spent hours on a small, cheap laptop I had bought with babysitting money, applying to colleges secretly. I chose anything that would get me as far away as possible, and when I found out there were actually programs that focused on women's rights and health and law, it felt like I had accidentally found the exit sign in a building I thought was sealed shut. When I got my acceptance letter for a university in another state, I sat on the floor of the bathroom to read it because it was the only place in the house where I could lock the door. I remember my hands shaking, not from fear but from this weird mix of relief and guilt. I could hear my mother in the kitchen bragging to someone on the phone about my sister's upcoming journeys and how proud she was, and I thought, she is never going to be proud of me for anything I want. I left for college at 19. My mother hugged me at the bus station like she was sending a reluctant missionary into hostile territory. She pressed a stack of pamphlets about ethical motherhood into my hand and told me to be careful not to let the world poison my mind. It will try to convince you that career matters more than family, she said, squeezing my fingers so hard it hurt. But your calling does not change just because you change your address. I smiled tightly, shoved the pamphlets into my bag, and got on the bus without looking back. I wish I could tell you that I never looked back at all, that I cut them off completely and lived happily ever after in some tiny apartment full of secondhand furniture and peace. But that would be a lie. Real life is messier. It took me years to figure out that going no contact was even an option. In college, I felt like someone had cracked a window open in a room I did not know was suffocating me. I met people who talked about bodily autonomy like it was just a normal part of being human, not some radical rebellion. I learned how systems can be abusive without ever raising a hand. I took classes about law and ethics and reproductive rights that made me feel both furious and alive. I remember sitting in a lecture hall one day, listening to a professor talk about informed consent and wanting to laugh and cry at the same time. Informed consent. In my house, consent had always been a one-way street. My mother informed, and we consented. If we resisted, she called it rebellion and sin and temporary confusion. I doubled down on my studies. I went to every talk, every workshop, every panel about reproductive justice I could find. It was not just academic for me. It was personal in a way I did not know how to explain without sounding unhinged. When other students talked about laws and policies in this detached way, I kept seeing my sister in my mind, holding her fake belly at 12, holding her very real belly at 18, holding someone else's baby at 19. By the time I finished law school, I had built a whole life that had nothing to do with my mother's plans. I worked at a small organization that helped women who were being pushed into pregnancies they did not want or could not safely carry, sometimes by partners, sometimes by religious pressure, sometimes by family. Every intake story felt like a distorted echo of my own childhood. If this were a neat, inspirational story, I would tell you I never went back. But of course I did. The thing about growing up in a family like mine is that the emotional ties are like those old braided ropes they used to use in gyms. You can cut one strand and the whole thing still holds. It takes time to pull them apart. I went back for holidays sometimes, always telling myself it was just to keep an eye on my sister. She was on her third pregnancy for another couple by the time I was working full-time. She would sit on the couch with swollen ankles while my mother fetched her herbal tea, and everyone around them talked about how brave and generous she was. I would sit across from them and watch my sister's face go strangely blank whenever someone mentioned the money. The health problems started early, like everyone except my mother had predicted. Persistent pain, infections, exhaustion that went beyond normal tired. My mother called it spiritual warfare. I called it what it was, a body being used like a rental property. Whenever I tried to bring it up gently, my sister would shut down or repeat my mother's lines almost word for word. This is my purpose, Julie. Not everyone understands. Some of us were chosen to carry. I wanted to shake her and scream that no one is chosen to be a vessel for other people's convenience. But I also knew that she was not the architect of this mess. She was the product. My mother, on the other hand, loved the attention. She kept in touch with all the couples my sister cared for. She attended birthday parties and sent holiday cards and somehow always managed to make herself the center of the story. I just feel like a grandmother to all of them, she would say, putting her hand over her heart. Somewhere in the middle of all those pregnancies, my sister had one baby who actually came home with her. My niece was not part of any contract, not technically, but my mother still treated her like a billboard. Every time someone came over, she would pull that little girl close and talk about how she was proof that our family was meant to give life, that one day my niece would grow up and help people just like her mother. Even as a toddler, she was already being drafted into the story. At some point, she got a job as a receptionist at a local fertility clinic. Of course she did. It was like the universe decided to place her behind the front desk of everything she worshipped. She would call me sometimes just to brag about how many opportunities were passing through her hands. "You would not believe how many young women are lost," she would say. "They do not know what a blessing it is to give life. At least your sister understands." I raised one right. I learned pretty early not to tell her anything real about my life. I never mentioned the details of my work. I never talked about my relationships. I kept everything vague because every piece of information you gave my mother turned into a tool she could use later. Which brings me to the night everything really snapped. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner. That is what my mother said when she called me anyway. "Just a little dinner to celebrate your sister," she said. "Nothing dramatic. We would love for you to be there." Julie, it has been too long. I almost said no. I had a case that was eating my brain and I was exhausted. But then my sister texted me a picture of a table set with candles, and my favorite dessert, and a caption that said, "Please, it would mean a lot." So I went. The second I walked into the house, I knew something was off. There were too many smiles, too much forced cheer, that weird high-pitched tone people use when they are trying to sell you something. My mother hugged me like a politician, all arms and perfume and no warmth. "We are so happy you are here," she said, and it sounded like a line she had rehearsed. The table was set perfectly. There were flowers I knew my mother could not really afford, new plates, cloth napkins. My sister was already seated, visibly pregnant again, her face pale in a way that made my stomach twist. We ate. We made small talk. My mother poured wine into my glass and kept topping it off like she was trying to win an award for hospitality. I took small sips because that is what you do when you still do not quite trust the person pouring. After the dishes were cleared, my mother clapped her hands and said, "We have something very special to share tonight." And that was my official cue that I had made a mistake by showing up. She pulled out a folder and laid it on the table like it was a sacred text. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her chair but did not say anything. "We have been praying," my mother began, "and an incredible opportunity has opened up. Julie, this is an answer to so many prayers you have no idea." I felt a prickle at the back of my neck. "What are you talking about?" I asked, already knowing I was not going to like the answer. My mother opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. "The clinic has a couple," she said, her voice all syrup and light, "and they are a perfect match. It is a beautiful situation. They would like to use your eggs." I stared at the papers like they were written in another language. Then I looked up at her. "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not." She sighed in that disappointed way that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with control. "You are not even going to look?" she asked. "You owe it to yourself to look." "I do not owe anyone my eggs," I said. "What are you talking about? Why would you think I would say yes to this?" My sister reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone who looked so tired. "Julie, just listen," she said. "It is not like you are carrying. It is just helping. You would not even have to change your life that much. I pulled my hand back. No, I repeated. I am not doing this. End of story. My mother's smile did not falter, but something hard flickered in her eyes. You are being dramatic, she said softly. This is not about anyone taking anything from you. This is about you finally stepping into what you were made for. I stood up. I am going home, I said. That is when my mother's hand landed on my shoulder, fingers digging into the fabric of my shirt. Sit down, she said, still smiling, but there was steel in her voice now. Just for a few minutes. We have everything ready. It will only take a moment. The room started to tilt a little, so slowly I almost did not notice at first. My head felt too light and too heavy at the same time. My vision fuzzed at the edges. I put my hand on the back of the chair to steady myself and looked at the wine glass. What did you do? I asked. My mother laughed softly. Do not be ridiculous. You are just tired, Julie. You work too much. That is why you do not think clearly sometimes. The edges of the room were blurring now. My sister came up behind me and wrapped her arms around mine, holding them in place. Just sign, she whispered. You will thank us later. You know you will. You always overthink everything, and then you end up here anyway. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like the only sound in the room. I blinked hard, trying to focus on the folder on the table. The papers were spread out neatly, with little sticky flags marking all the places where someone wanted my signature. I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. My name typed out over and over on forms I had never seen before, next to phrases like voluntary consent and requested treatment. I do not know exactly where the burst of adrenaline came from, but it hit me like a wave. I twisted out of my sister's grip, sending her stumbling sideways, and grabbed the edge of the table to keep myself from falling. A couple of the papers slid to the floor. One of them landed face up, and I saw a date and a signature that was supposed to be mine but was not. You already did it, I said, my voice hoarse. You already signed my name. My mother reached for the folder like she could hide the evidence if she just moved fast enough. You are confused, sweetheart, she said. You asked me to get the process started. You forget things when you are stressed. That is why you need us. I ran. It was not graceful. I nearly tripped over a chair. I slammed into the doorframe. But I made it out of that house, down the steps, and into my car with my hands shaking so bad it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. I do not even know how I drove home without hitting anything. I just remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers went numb and repeating out loud, no, 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 like a broken record. For the next couple of days, I did what a lot of people do when something insane happens in their family. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I went to work. I answered emails. I told myself that maybe it had not been as bad as it felt in the moment, that maybe I was being dramatic. It is wild how easily you can gaslight yourself when you have been trained to doubt your own perception since childhood. Then the notifications started. First, an automated email from a clinic thanking me for taking the next step in my fertility journey and confirming an upcoming consultation I had never scheduled. Then a message from my insurance portal about pre-authorization for services. Then a tiny charge on my card for a screening fee from a provider I had never contacted. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the screen as the pieces clicked into place. It was not just a weird dinner. It was a plan. My mother had access to my basic information from years of medical forms she had filled out when I was still under her roof. She worked the front desk at a clinic. She had my social security number, my date of birth, my old address. All she had to do was pretend to be helping her adult daughter start a family, and no one would question it. My stomach rolled. A week earlier, my mother had stopped by my apartment unannounced with a bottle of vitamins. I take these every day, she had said, setting them on my kitchen counter. They are amazing for energy. You look so tired lately, sweetheart. Just try them. I had been too exhausted to argue, and honestly, I thought they were harmless. Just generic wellness supplements. I had been taking them every morning for the past week. Now I walked to my kitchen and grabbed that bottle, turning it over in my hand. The label said something about general wellness, but there was no manufacturer name, no pharmacy sticker, nothing official. Just a plastic bottle with a printed label that looked like it had been made on a home printer. I thought about how tired I had been, the nausea, the weird soreness, the days when my emotions felt like they were swinging on a rope someone else was pulling. All of it had started right after I began taking these. I flushed those pills down the toilet so fast it would have impressed a magician. The next day, I woke up feeling worse. The nausea was nonstop. My head pounded. My heart felt like it was doing its own erratic dance. I tried to tough it out for a few hours, but when I almost fainted in the shower, I finally dragged myself to the emergency room. I picked a hospital on the opposite side of town from the clinic where my mother worked, because I am not completely stupid. I sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, pressing the heel of my hand into my eye sockets while a triage nurse called my name. They did blood work, they did a urine test, they checked my vitals. After a while, a doctor came in with a tablet and this kind of concerned but confused expression. "Your hormone levels are interesting," he said, which is never a phrase you want to hear from a doctor. "Interesting how?" I asked. He hesitated. "Have you been taking any medication? For fertility, maybe? Or hormone treatments of any kind?" I laughed, which came out sounding like a short, hysterical bark. "Absolutely not," I said. "But my mother gave me some vitamins. And she works at a fertility clinic. And she has been trying to convince me to let her help me." The doctor glanced at the nurse, then back at me. "Can your mother get access to your medical information?" he asked. "Probably," I said. "She used to take me to appointments. And she has my basic info. And she has never heard of a boundary in her life." That is when the nurse stepped forward and did the thing that honestly changed everything for me. She said very calmly, "I am going to ask your mother to wait outside. And then I want you to tell me exactly what is going on." I blinked at her. "My mother is here?" The nurse nodded. "She arrived about 20 minutes ago. She said she is very worried about you." Of course she was. Of course she had followed the digital trail. Of course she could not stand the idea of me talking to anyone about what was going on without her controlling every word. "Do not let her in," I said, probably a little louder than necessary. "Please. I am fine if you think I am being dramatic. Just do not let her in this room." The nurse's face softened. "We do not think you are being dramatic," she said. "We think you might be in a situation where someone is making medical decisions for you without your consent. That is not okay." That was the first time anyone had ever said it out loud like that. Not overprotective, not old-fashioned, not strict parenting, abuse, coercion, not okay. They brought in a social worker, then a police officer from the domestic violence unit. I sat on the hospital bed in that thin gown, my feet swinging above the floor, and told them everything. The belts, the fake pregnancies, the training, my sister's health, the dinner, the forged forms, the weird hormones, the fake vitamins. I kept waiting for someone to roll their eyes or look skeptical, because that is what I was used to. Instead, the officer just nodded slowly and kept writing, asking clarifying questions in this calm, steady way that made me feel like maybe I was not crazy after all. "Do you have any of the paperwork from the other night?" he asked. I pulled out my phone with hands that would not stop trembling and showed him the photo I had taken of the contract when my mother thought she had distracted me. I had been too shaken to look at it closely before, but now, with someone else there, I could see all the little details. My name repeated over and over. My information. Little check marks next to the words voluntary and eager. "Did you sign any of this?" the officer asked. "No," I said. "But it looks like I did. They must have traced my signature or practiced it. It is not perfect, but it is close enough that someone glancing fast might accept it." The social worker flipped through my chart on the tablet and frowned. "There are documents here from a clinic," she said quietly. "They were faxed over as part of your record. They list your mother as your healthcare proxy." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. "That is not possible," I said. "I never signed anything like that." She turned the screen toward me. There it was. My name, my supposed signature, my mother listed as the person authorized to make decisions if I was unable to. The date was 3 months ago. "She works there," I said slowly. "She has access to the forms. She knows enough about my handwriting to fake it. If she could get them signed off by someone who trusts her, it would not be hard." The officer's jaw tightened. "Okay," he said. "This is more than just a family disagreement. This is potential fraud and medical abuse. We need to document everything." It should have felt like relief. And in a way it did. But it also felt like stepping onto a moving walkway you cannot get off. Because the thing about systems is that once you pull one thread, all the other threads start moving too. While all this was happening, my phone kept buzzing on the little table next to the bed. When I finally looked at it, there were dozens of messages. My mother, my sister, a couple of people from our community. All versions of the same theme. "You are overreacting. You are breaking your mother's heart. We were just trying to help. You said you wanted a family one day. We believed you." Then there were the other messages, the ones that made my skin crawl. Screenshots from a social media app showing posts my mother had made in private groups, talking about her poor daughter who has been consumed by fear of infertility. Comments from people saying how sad it was that I was in denial about my true purpose. She was building a narrative before I even knew there was a story being told. The hospital did their part. They kept my mother out of my room. Before the social worker flagged the paperwork, every nurse had just treated that fake proxy as real, so my mother had already been listed as my primary contact without anyone checking with me. They flagged my chart. They started the paperwork to revoke that fake proxy. But hospitals do not exist in a vacuum. They have lawyers. They have liability fears. And my mother apparently had her own lawyer. He showed up the next afternoon. Slick suit, friendly smile, the whole thing. He introduced himself as someone helping the family navigate a difficult time. He sat in the chair across from my bed and started talking in this gentle tone that made my teeth itch. "Julie," he said, "your mother is very concerned about you. She says you have been under a lot of stress, that you have been talking about fertility and children in a way that worries her. She just wants to make sure you get the help you need." I stared at him. "Did she tell you she tried to drug me and forge my signature?" I asked. He smiled like I had said something mildly inappropriate at a dinner party. "She told me there was a misunderstanding," he said, "and that you have always been very intense about these topics." I wanted to throw something at his head. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "I am a lawyer. I work in reproductive rights. I know what consent looks like. This is not it." He shrugged slightly. "We can argue definitions all day," he said, "but from where I am sitting, I see a woman who is refusing needed treatment, a mother who is trying to help, and a pattern of emotional instability that has other people worried." There it was. The old trick. Pathologize the person who says no. Turn resistance into a symptom. My mother, of course, leaned into that narrative like it was the only song she knew how to sing. She told anyone who would listen that I had become obsessed with never having children, that my work had poisoned me, that I had lost my mind and needed to be saved from myself. She dug up old texts where I had said things like, "Sometimes I wonder if I am broken because I do not want what everyone else wants," and presented them as proof that I was dangerously unstable. She posted vague emotional updates about spiritual attacks on her family. She cried to our old community leaders about how the world had stolen her daughter. The worst part is that it worked on some people, including for a while my boyfriend. He came to the hospital the day after the lawyer. His face was pale and tight. He sat on the edge of the bed and took my hand like he was afraid I would dissolve. "Julie," he said quietly, "I love you. You know that, right?" "Okay," I said slowly. That is usually how people start breakup speeches. So I am not thrilled, but go on. He let out a shaky laugh. "I am not breaking up with you," he said. "I am just confused. Your mother called me. She told me you were in crisis. She said you had been talking about babies constantly, that you had changed your mind, and then you freaked out and ran. She sent me screenshots of messages where you talked about maybe, one day, considering kids." I closed my eyes. I knew exactly which messages he meant. Late-night chats where I had said things like, maybe in some parallel universe, if I had a different childhood, I would want kids. Or, sometimes I wonder what kind of mother I would have been if I had one. Those were not plans. Those were thoughts. And there is a big difference between thinking about something and signing up to have your body used. "I am not in crisis because I secretly want a baby and changed my mind," I said. "I am in crisis because my mother wants a baby and does not care that it would be coming out of my body." He looked torn, like he was standing on a bridge that was swaying in the wind. "I want to believe you," he said. "I do, but there is so much noise. The clinic, the lawyer, your mother, the posts. I just need you to tell me straight. Are you okay?" "No," I said. "I am not okay, but not in the way they are saying." I told him everything. He listened. He asked questions. He went quiet for a long time. Then he squeezed my hand and said, "Okay, then we fight." It should have been simple after that. I had a supportive partner. I had a social worker on my side. I had an officer who believed me. But nothing about this was simple. Because my mother did not just want me to be a donor. She wanted to control the story. That is how I ended up in that locked room I started with. The official reason was observation. The psychiatrist assigned to my case decided that the safest course of action was to keep me under watch for a few days. On paper, it sounded reasonable. A woman making serious accusations against her own mother, involving hormones and forged documents and medical abuse. It is not shocking that someone might want to make sure she was mentally stable. The problem was not the idea of observation. The problem was who was writing the notes. The psychiatrist was a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice who, according to the admin, occasionally attended a book club that my mother also participated in. When I pointed that out, they shrugged and said there was a shortage of staff and no obvious conflict of interest because they were not close friends. During our first session, she asked me to tell her my story in my own words. I did. I watched her face carefully while I talked. She nodded. She took notes. She asked about my childhood, my work, my relationships. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the pad and said, "You have done important work helping other women, Julie. But sometimes when we devote our lives to fighting something, we can start seeing it everywhere." I stared at her. "It is not a hallucination if it is actually happening," I said. She smiled gently. "Of course," she said. "But perception is complicated. Your mother, for example, sees herself as a loving parent who wants grandchildren. You see her as an abuser. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "The truth is in the forged documents. It is in the lab results that show hormones I never agreed to take. It is in the fake proxy. This is not a misunderstanding. This is deliberate." She made a note. "You sound very certain," she said. "Sometimes certainty can be a defense against deeper fear." Within 24 hours, she had written a recommendation that I be held for at least 72 hours for observation. The note mentioned fixed beliefs about being controlled and history of intense focus on reproduction. They took my shoes. They gave me paper clothes. They moved me to a ward where the doors clicked shut behind you and did not open unless someone buzzed you out. My mother brought a suitcase. Because no one had removed her from the system as my healthcare proxy yet, the unit treated her as an approved family visitor and buzzed her in. She showed up that afternoon like she was visiting a spa. She had packed maternity clothes in soft colors, a journal with a cover that said "Journey to Motherhood," and a framed photo of one of the babies my sister had carried. "I thought these might make you feel more at home," she said, setting the photo on the table. "Sometimes leaning into the thing you fear is the only way through it." I sat on the bed, watching her arrange the room like it was a baby shower waiting to happen, and thought, this is what it feels like to be erased while you are still breathing. I wish I could tell you I fought her the whole time, that I kept yelling the truth until someone listened, but I did something that still makes part of me cringe when I think about it. I changed tactics. After the first day, after watching the way the staff reacted to my mother's tears, and the psychiatrist's notes, and the lawyer's calls, I realized that the more I argued, the more unstable I looked. Every time I pointed out another inconsistency, it got labeled as hypervigilance. Every time I refused to sign something, it became oppositional behavior. So I stopped fighting. Out loud, at least. I started nodding along. I started saying things like, maybe I have been too rigid, and maybe I'm afraid of something I do not understand. I told the psychiatrist that I had gotten caught up in my work and lost sight of my personal life. I said maybe my mother was right that I was running from motherhood. I told my mother I wanted to learn more about the process. I asked to see the file on the couple she had picked. Inside, I was disgusted. Outside, I played the part. You know that saying, if you cannot beat them, join them. I was doing a twisted version of that. If I could not beat them by insisting on reality, I would join their fantasy long enough to get my hands on the controls again. The staff started writing things like improvement and increased insight in my chart. The psychiatrist told my mother she was seeing remarkable progress. My mother started crying happy tears instead of angry ones. She would sit at the edge of my bed and stroke my hair while I pretended to be grateful. "I knew you would come back to yourself," she whispered one afternoon. "I am just tired of fighting," I said, which was technically true, just not in the way she meant. The nurse who had first pulled my mother out of the room got reprimanded for overstepping professional boundaries. I did not see her again for days. When she finally walked past my door during a night shift, she slid a tiny folded paper under it with her shoe. Inside was a phone number and 6 words. If you get one call, use it. On the 3rd day, I got my one call. Officially, it was to my mother. That is what the staff assumed. I stepped into the little phone booth with the cracked handset, dialed my mother's number, and waited for the nurse to step away to give me privacy. Then I hung up and dialed a different number from memory. I called a colleague from my office, one who specialized in guardianship cases. When she picked up, I said, "I need you to listen and not interrupt until I am done." And then I talked as fast as I could for the next 4 minutes. I told her about the forged proxy, the fake consent forms, the hormones, the attempted forced donation, the loopy psychiatrist who shared a social circle with my mother. The 72-hour hold? The plan to move forward with the clinic? She did not try to soothe me. She did not tell me I was overreacting. She said, "Okay, we can file to challenge the proxy and block any procedures. There will be a hearing. I will represent you. Can you get to a courthouse if you are released?" "If I have to crawl," I said. She laughed, which was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. "You will not have to crawl," she said, "but you might have to lie." "Already on it," I said. The psychiatrist signed off on my release the next day. She called it a leap forward in insight and noted that I was finally accepting support toward a healthy future. My mother brought flowers and a new cardigan and told everyone at the nurses' station that they were heroes. As we walked out of the ward, I could feel the eyes of the other patients on me. Some of them looked hopeful. Some looked hollow. I wanted to stop and tell every single one of them that I believed them, whatever their story was, but I could barely keep my own legs moving. My mother drove. Of course she did. She had already planned the route. She said we would stop by my apartment so I could grab a few things before heading to the clinic for final paperwork. I nodded. I said thank you. I said I was grateful. Inside, I was counting. We stopped at my place. She followed me in, immediately gravitating toward my shelves like she wanted to rearrange my life one object at a time. While she was busy replacing my law books with parenting guides she had brought for inspiration, I locked myself in the bathroom and dialed my colleague again. "The hearing is set," she said. "End of the week. The petition your mother filed is worse than we thought. She is trying to get full medical guardianship. If that is granted, she could consent to almost anything in your name." My vision went spotty for a second. "I will be there," I said. "But she thinks I am going to the clinic." "Then make her think that," my colleague said. "Just do not actually go." Easier said than done when the person driving the car believes God put her on earth to orchestrate your womb. On the way to the clinic, I asked my mother if we could stop at a coffee shop. "I just need something in my stomach," I said. "I feel lightheaded." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine," she said. "We have a tight schedule, but we can spare a few minutes. It is important that you be calm and open-minded." She parked. She got out. She went inside to order, talking to the person at the counter with that bright, performative smile she used on anyone who might someday testify about how loving she was. I got out of the car, walked calmly to the side door of the building, and then bolted as soon as I was out of her line of sight. I ran around the back, cut through an alley, and hit the main road with my heart slamming against my ribs. I pulled out my phone, opened a ride app, and typed in the address of the courthouse with shaking fingers. My boyfriend had wanted to come with me to the courthouse, but I told him no. Not because I did not trust him, but because if my mother saw him there, she would twist it into proof that I was being manipulated by outsiders. "This is something I need to do alone," I had told him the night before, sitting on his couch with my phone turned off so my mother could not track me. He had not liked it, but he understood. "Call me the second it is over," he said. "Win or lose, I will be waiting." On the way there, my mother called 15 times. Then she started texting. "Where are you? This is not funny. You are making a scene. The couple is already at the clinic. You are embarrassing me. God is watching you." I muted the notifications and stared out the window, trying not to throw up from the combination of adrenaline and leftover hormones. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. Or maybe that was just my nerves. My colleague was waiting in the hallway outside the courtroom, a stack of folders in her arms and this look on her face that said she was ready to go to war. "You made it," she said, like she had not actually doubted I would, but had still worried. "Barely," I said, "but yes." Inside the courtroom, my mother sat at the front with her lawyer, clutching a tissue and dabbing at her eyes like she was in a soap opera. My sister was there too, looking worn out and older than her age, her hands resting on her stomach. Behind them sat a few people from our old community, ready to nod solemnly at whatever tragedy my mother described. The judge looked tired. That was my first impression. Just a person at the tail end of a long week, staring at a stack of cases that all involved parents and children and pain. My mother's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a devoted mother watching her daughter spiral into fixation and paranoia. He mentioned my work, my daily exposure to stories of exploitation, as if that had somehow infected me. He talked about my supposed obsession with not becoming a mother, like it was a pathology. He handed over the psychiatrist's notes. He mentioned the 72-hour hold. He used phrases like risk to self and unstable identity. Then it was our turn. My colleague did not raise her voice. She did not pace dramatically. She just laid out the facts. She presented the fake proxy alongside samples of my actual signature and pointed out the discrepancies. She showed the timeline, the job at the clinic, The sudden appearance of my name in their files, the dinner, the forged consent forms, the hormones in my system I had not agreed to take. She handed over copies of the posts my mother had made online, the messages she sent my boyfriend and colleagues, the emails from the clinic. She called the nurse and the social worker from the hospital to testify about my mother's behavior there, the way she tried to speak over me, the way she acted like she had already been given authority she did not legitimately possess. I testified too. Standing there, facing my mother across that room, I felt all the years of training telling me to soften my voice, to downplay, to make her look better than she deserved. I ignored it. I talked about the belts when I was 8, the forced breathing exercises, the dolls, the way my sister's health had degraded after multiple pregnancies performed like acts of charity. I talked about the pressure, the guilt, the way every opportunity my mother saw was just another way to use our bodies. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just told the truth in the calmest voice I could manage. My mother cried, though. She sobbed into her tissue. She shook her head like she could not believe what I was saying. "I would never hurt my daughter," she said when it was her turn. "I just want her to be happy. She has always been so angry, so closed off to the blessing of life. I made mistakes. I pushed too hard, but it is only because I love her." The judge listened. He asked questions. He looked at the documents for a long time. In the end, he did not give some cinematic speech. He just cleared his throat and said that the evidence did not support granting my mother guardianship, that there were serious concerns about fraud and coercion that would need further investigation. That, effective immediately, my mother was barred from making any medical decisions for me, that she was not to contact me outside of legal channels until a separate order could be reviewed, a restraining order. That is what it came down to. A piece of paper that said, in official language, "You do not own this person." My mother gasped like she had been slapped. My sister's eyes went wide. I felt something in my chest that was not quite victory and not quite relief. It was more like the feeling you get when you finally set down a suitcase you have been carrying so long you forgot how heavy it was. I called my boyfriend from the courthouse steps. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone twice. When he picked up, I could not get any words out at first, just this weird gasping sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I won," I finally managed to say. The judge said no, she cannot touch me. There was a long pause on the other end, and then I heard him exhale like he had been holding his breath for days. "I am coming to get you," he said. "Do not move. I will be there in 20 minutes. After that, it was not like my life snapped back into place overnight. It was messy. People from our old community took sides. Some sent me quiet messages saying they believed me. Others accused me of publicly humiliating my mother. The clinic where my mother worked got pulled into an investigation. There were audits. There were questions about how many other young women had been helped into processes they did not fully understand. My mother lost her job eventually, but of course she framed it as persecution. My sister had her last pregnancy not long after the hearing. The complications were serious. There were words thrown around like pelvic damage and future risk. She ended up with mobility issues that changed her day-to-day life in ways my mother refused to acknowledge. She knew the risks, my mother said once in a recording someone sent me. She chose this calling. God will honor that. It took me months to stop flinching when my phone buzzed. My boyfriend stayed through all of it. The paranoia, the nightmares, the days I could not leave my apartment because I was convinced my mother was watching from somewhere. He never once made me feel like I was too much or too broken. When I finally told him I was not sure I would ever want kids, he just shrugged and said, "Good thing I fell in love with you, not some hypothetical future version of you." Even with the restraining order, I half expected my mother to appear at every corner. I changed my passwords. I locked down my accounts. I had my office run security checks on my email. People at work had to apologize. They had believed the story in that mass email my out of office supposedly came from, the one my mother had orchestrated about my fertility crisis. It was embarrassing and humiliating and infuriating, but it was also proof of exactly how deep her manipulation could go. Some of the women I had helped as clients reached out. One called and said, "I am sorry I doubted you even for a second. I did not want to believe someone's family could be like that. I should have known better." I told her it was okay. I do not know if I believed that completely, but I meant it in the sense that I understood. It is easier to believe in abstract villains than in mothers who weaponize love. Time passed. Not a lot, but enough. One day, months later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. When I picked up, a small voice on the other end said, "Is this Julie?" "Yes," I said slowly. Who is this? It is me, the voice said. Your niece. I had to borrow a phone. Grandma says when I am older I will help people like Mom does, because our bodies are special. But I do not want to. I am scared. Is that bad? I sat down on the floor of my living room. My legs just kind of gave out. No, I said. It is not bad. It is okay to be scared. It is okay to not want that. Your body is yours. Nobody gets to decide what you do with it just because they are older or louder. She was quiet for a long time. Ray. Then she whispered, Can I call you again sometime? Anytime, I said. You can always call me. After that, she became this little secret line in the sand, proof that what happened to me and to my sister does not have to keep happening forever. I started taking more cases involving young women whose parents were pushing them toward things they did not fully understand. I talked to hospital staff about spotting patterns of coercion. I worked with clinics that actually cared about consent to set up better safeguards. My mother still tells people that I am lost. She still posts vague messages online about persecution and betrayal. She still insists she was only ever trying to love me the way she knew how. Sometimes I see pictures of my sister on a friend of a friend's account, sitting in a chair with a blanket over her legs, one of the kids she carried perched on her lap. She looks tired in a way that goes beyond lack of sleep. But there is something else in her eyes now, something like doubt. We are not close. Not yet. Maybe we will never be. Too much has happened. But every time my niece calls and whispers another fear or another question into the phone, I remember that little 8-year-old girl in the weighted belt, trying to figure out why her back hurt, and why everyone kept telling her it was supposed to be a blessing. If I can stop even one more girl from growing up thinking her value starts and ends with her uterus, then maybe all of this will at least mean something. I do not have a neat moral to wrap this up with. There is no, and then we all healed, or, and then my mother apologized. She has not. She probably never will. Some people would rather burn the world around them than admit they built the house on rotten foundations. What I have is this: a life that is mine, a body that is mine, a voice I finally learned how to use, even if it shakes, a file in a courthouse that says, in very dry, very official language, that my mother does not get to own me, and a little girl on the other end of a phone line, asking if it is okay to choose herself. I tell her yes every single time. Not because I am wise, not because I am healed, but because I remember what it felt like when every adult around me said no. Since all of this happened, people sometimes ask me if I ever think about having kids in a normal way, like with a partner and a planned pregnancy and cute announcement photos and all that. I always kind of laugh, not because it is a ridiculous question, but because there is nothing normal about how my brain files that topic. It is like asking someone who grew up in a house fire if they ever think about lighting candles for fun. Maybe, someday. Maybe not. I honestly do not know. What I do know is that I stopped treating the question like a ticking clock under my pillow. For the first time in my life, I get to be a whole person without adding mother or not mother as a label in giant capital letters. I can wake up, make coffee, go to work, argue with coworkers about case strategy, binge a show on my couch, take a walk at night, and not feel like every single choice is secretly part of some long audition for a role I never asked to play. There are days when I feel guilty about that. The conditioning runs deep. I will be grocery shopping and see a little girl holding her mom's hand, and for a second this voice in the back of my mind will hiss, "See? That could have been you, if you were not so stubborn, if you were not so broken." On those days I hear my mother more than I hear myself. I have to consciously remind my brain that I am not broken just because I do not want to replicate her life. There are other days when I picture some hypothetical future version of me, older, maybe with a kid, maybe without, maybe mentoring interns instead, maybe teaching, maybe running a small practice with people who actually get it. And on those days, the thing that stands out is not the presence or absence of children. It is the fact that in every version that does not make my chest tighten, I am the one making the choices. Sometimes, late at night, I replay that locked room scene in my head, the one with the plastic stars and the paper clothes and my mother humming that lullaby she used to weaponize. I used to get stuck there, like a movie paused on the worst frame. Now, when my brain pulls that file, I make myself let the scene keep going. I picture the nurse sliding that tiny piece of paper under the door. I picture myself dialing that number and saying, "Listen, I have 4 minutes." I picture the moment in the courtroom when the judge said no. It is not about pretending the bad parts did not happen. It is about remembering that they were not the only parts. My niece loves to draw. At least once a month, she sends me a picture she made at school or on the back of some church flyer she was supposed to keep clean. There are a lot of animals, a lot of crooked houses, and a surprising number of girls with capes. When I asked her once why the capes, she said, "Because they can leave whenever they want. They do not have to stay where people are mean." I keep every single drawing in a folder in my closet. It is not some shrine or anything dramatic. It is just paper stacked on paper, proof that she is already rewriting what is possible in her own head without asking permission. Sometimes I think about my sister before all of this, before the contracts and the complications and the wheelchairs and the parties where everyone clapped for her swollen belly. I think about the way she used to sneak candy into our room and hide under my blanket during storms, how she used to whisper that she wanted to live in a big city one day and wear bright lipstick and eat dinner after midnight. Those dreams got ground down into something my mother could use. I do not know if she will ever fully step out of that. I do not know if she can. But I do know that the line between too late and still possible is not as clear as people like to pretend. I did not cut my mother off when I first left for college. It took years of tiny realizations, and one very big, very dangerous push to make me finally say enough. If it took me that long with all my education and my job and my resources, I cannot judge my sister for taking longer, or maybe never. I used to think breaking cycles meant fixing everybody, dragging the whole family out of the fire with you. Now I think it might just mean refusing to throw more fuel on it, even when everyone around you insists that standing by the flames is the only way to stay warm. So no, I am not going to end this with some tidy line about forgiveness or finding peace. I have not forgiven my mother. I am not at peace with what she did. There are still nights when I wake up convinced that someone has a key to my apartment, that there is a file being opened somewhere with my name on it next to a treatment code I never agreed to. Trauma is not a light switch. It is more like a smoke alarm that goes off sometimes for no good reason, and other times exactly when it should. But I am here. I am breathing air I chose. I am living a life that does not revolve around making myself smaller and softer so someone else can sleep at night. I am learning how to answer questions from doctors without looking at the door to see if my mother is about to burst in and talk over me. I am building something that my niece can point to one day and say, "See, it does not have to be like that." If you grew up with a parent like mine, someone who dressed control up as love and called your resistance selfish, I am not going to tell you to call them and make up. I am not going to tell you that they did their best, or that one day you will understand. Maybe you will. Maybe you will not. That is between you and whatever version of healing you can live with. All I will say is this. You are not crazy for noticing that something was wrong. You are not ungrateful for wanting a life that does not look like the one they tried to force on you. You are not broken because you put a lock on a door someone else thinks they have the right to open whenever they want. If my mother could see this, if she could read these words, she would probably say it is all proof that the world has hardened my heart, that I let bitterness win, that I let my calling die. She would tell anyone who would listen that I was meant to be a mother and I chose to be a victim instead. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head when I turn down an invitation to a baby shower, or when I tell a doctor I am not interested in fertility counseling, or when I close my phone after my niece hangs up and sit quietly in my apartment, just letting the silence be mine. The voice is quieter now, though. It has to compete with other voices I have collected along the way. Nurses who believed me, friends who stayed, clients who trusted me with their own messy stories. A little girl who draws capes on every girl she puts on paper. And my own voice finally saying the words my mother never taught me. I do not want that. I do not agree. I am not yours. That might not sound like much, but for someone who grew up being told that her whole body was on layaway for a future she never chose, it is everything.